It's been a couple of weeks since I did the first start of the car, and part of why I did it when I did was because it was a few days before I had to go have some surgery done, and I really wanted to go into that knowing that the car had started so that I wouldn't be driving myself crazy sitting around recovering and thinking I'm so close, I wonder if it's going to work or not. Sort of debated about that, but especially after I coughed when I was doing some of the systems testing beforehand, I thought pretty strongly it would start, and so it was really nice to get that done ahead of time. But obviously I didn't have everything finished, so I've gotten some chance to work on the car here and there, so I'm going to go over some of the things I've done, and then today's going to be a day working on the car for me, so we'll get some more stuff accomplished.
It's sort of hard to get a good angle where I can try to be in the video while talking about some of this and making it so that you can actually see what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to hold the phone here and record a few things. So first thing, you may remember that there was some smoke coming from the engine towards the end of the first start, and I mentioned in the video that the rocker covers, valve covers, specifically underneath the breather here, were contacting the rocker arms, and I knew that that was a risk because of the big roller rockers that I'm using. And I bought these valve covers not certain whether they were going to work without hitting, but I really think they look good. So what I did was I bought these spacers. I have not run the engine since putting them on, but these are just a little bit over 1 inch spacers, give plenty of room, easy to install, and I think they actually look pretty good because just being cast aluminum, they match the intake. It doesn't, and they match the casting of the heads. It doesn't look like an afterthought so much unless you look really carefully at it. And if nothing else, also with the velocity stacks, they kind of help get the valve covers up to a more appropriate height. So that's one thing that I did. Another thing I did, and I'd been planning on doing this before, and I thought about even doing it before first start, was I went ahead and I put the exhaust wrap onto the headers. So I'll be the first to admit that this is not the prettiest job in the world. It's been probably 15 years since I did header wrap. I don't think there's anybody who really enjoys doing header wrap, but you do it because you like to have the heat protection, and that's something I really wanted in this case. The biggest thing that was driving that for me was, you can see how close this brake line is to the headers. It's only about 1 inch or so, and so I didn't want to risk boiling the brake fluid, even though I'm using a good Motul .5.1. But you can also see, if you look carefully, I put some of this header wrap around that line to help give it a little bit of extra protection. People also will make the note that the headers will tend to make the footwells really hot when you're driving, which makes a lot of sense. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to do it on a Cobra, on one of these cars. The wiring looks like even more of a mess than it did before, probably. And the reason for that is that I've made some more progress. You know, I've got a lot of wires that are running through the transmission tunnel here, and I can't drive the car like that because the drive shaft is going to just eat them up. So I need to get those loomed up and get them all secured, but I don't want to do that until I've tested everything, make sure that the wiring is all working properly. And so to that end, I've gotten some more of the wires run front to back that need to be run. In fact, I've only got the 2 fuses left that I need to accommodate. One is going to be for the lights, and then one's going to be for the horn, and I'm going to use that horn circuit also for the windshield wipers. So I need to run those wires up, and then I need to run the wiring to the back for the air conditioner control. And at that point, I should be more or less done. I guess while I'm back here, I'll point out that I did run wiring for the taillights, so that is there and taken care of. It's not hooked up, but I've got it running front to back. Other thing is, up here you can see I've got a few relays hanging around. So most of the relays that I have are in the back of the car, just kind of right behind driver's head there in the trunk area. And that was intentional, but there were a few circuits for which that just wasn't going to make any sense. and those were the headlights and the horn. I wanted to, I've got all the headlight controls up here, and especially switching between high and low beams, where for a single 7-inch, you want to turn off the low beam circuit when you're turning on the high beams, at least for most headlights, certainly for the sealed beam ones. I'm probably going to put some LED headlights in, and depending on what kind I go with, that may require something different. But I wanted to put these relays up here. So after playing around a little bit, I found that what looked like was going to be the best thing was just to put some riv nuts in this steel pipe here, or steel beam here, and steel tube, and then also have the ground here. So I'm gonna put the relays up here. I've run most of the wiring for it. So now at this point, all that I really need to do is finish up some of this wiring, and then once I have all of that going, I might be able to even try turning on the air conditioning compressor for the first time today, see if that works. And depending on how far we get, I might try to get the car back outside and see if I can finish the break-in run. So let's get to it. All right, I got those last few wires front to back in, and I think now I'm going to push the car out, see if I can't run it another 10 to 15 minutes and get that cam break-in completed. All right, got the Cobra pushed out. I've got my laptop hooked up, so let's see if it starts, and let's see how she runs. was the second start and finishing up the break-in of the engine. You'll notice that there was some smoke while it was running. That's really not unexpected between some of the oil that had come out of the valve covers before and was probably still in a few places. But also keep in mind this is the first time the engine's run with that header wrap on it. So it's normal and expected for that to smoke a little bit the first couple of starts until it gets all nice and baked on. I did put my hands around the areas of the headers in a bit, and it seems like it's working really well, so I think it'll do what I'm going for with it. Just a couple of other notes that you probably couldn't see since, well, I know you couldn't see because of where the phone was. So oil temperature gauge works, and it got up to about 210 or 220 at the max. That was a little surprising to me, I think, that it got quite that high for just sitting here and idling. So I'll be curious to see what it does once I start driving it. I did not put an oil cooler on this, and so I want to see how it does on the road, and maybe I'll add one. My first impression is that I'm probably going to want to add one. Coolant temperature, that got up to almost 220 at one point. The reason for that is because the fuse for the cooling fan blew. I had a 25 amp fuse in there. I guess I needed a 30 amp fuse. I put that in and it didn't blow. And then that brought the temperature right back down. I wasn't going to abort the run for that because 220 is hotter than you want, but it's not catastrophic, especially when you're just running lower power like what this was right here. And then once the fan was on, it got the temperature back down under control. I was also running the heater over here, and the heater does work. I had hot air blowing out, so that was good, and I was running it for two reasons. First one was to see, is it working? And then the second one was to try to help give a little bit of extra cooling for the engine. So maybe a couple of notes of things. If you've seen some of the videos where I talked about the cooling fan, you'll note that the cooling fan doesn't have a shroud. It's basically just bolted right to the radiator with a little bit of spacing. I'll have to see once I'm driving it in traffic and at stop and go conditions if that's going to work or not. Nice thing in Kansas, you're not usually sitting in traffic all that much, and I'm certainly going to try not to be with this car. But it's unavoidable sometimes, so we'll see how it does sitting at idle. So that's one thing to note. Another thing is that you may have seen some water that was coming out of the overflow hose. Not unexpected, but I was planning on doing some kind of an overflow tank, and I think I definitely want one of those now, especially seeing that. I was surprised at just how much seemed to come out, but so I guess that means it was hitting the 13 PSI or whatever that cap's rated to fairly early. But otherwise, the engine seemed really responsive. It has a great sound at idle. I really love that nice, heavy, lopey idle. But it seems to be pretty responsive, and that was one of the things that I was sort of wondering about a little bit with how this was going to be, of how responsive it was. And keep in mind, I haven't done anything to dial in the fueling yet. This is still very much just first run, that's it. So I think I'm going to call this a success. Basically, I want to get an overflow can, that's an overflow tank, and put that in at some point. And I need to do, now that I've done the engine running, I'm going to need to do an oil change. And the cam is considered broken in at this point. At least I'm going to say it is until it gets wiped out. And now that I've got the wires run and all that, now I'm at a point where probably the next big thing I'm going to be doing is working towards getting this thing ready for first drive, and a lot of that is going to be getting the wiring all together, loomed properly so that it's not going to hit the drive shaft. And you couldn't see, but when I was pushing this car out, the drive shaft was actually catching these wires, and they were released. That's why I paused a lot while I was pushing it out, was I was looking to make sure that the wires got released. And they did, but there's no question if I was driving this car on the road, they would just get torn up. It all needs to get cleaned up before I can drive it. So I think with that, I'm going to pull this thing back into the garage and call it a day. Disappointed with how
this all went today. This is, really what I think anybody would like to have their first start go like. And granted, this was the second start, and there were a couple of issues, but that's more or less expected. The minor item, the only real item I had during this first start or second start today was the fuse blowing for the cooling fan, and that's not a big deal. But one thing I did want to point out, and one of the things I like about how I designed this, was that, like I was saying, it was getting maybe a little bit warm, and today's about an 80-degree day here in Kansas. It's not super hot by any stretch, the kind of day that you'd be out driving this car, really. And maybe we'll see how it does when I actually start sitting in traffic with it, especially with the air conditioning on, and things like that. But one of the things that I really like about having the electric water pump and electric fan is that I can turn the engine off at any time and then just leave the ignition on, and the water pump and the fan will work, and you'll have full cooling capacity, the maximum cooling capacity this thing can put out, just sitting here with the engine off. And so the engine stops producing heat and you can keep it cooling. So, and that was one of the things I liked about doing it this way. In fact, I didn't get this on the video, but after I shut the engine off, I turned the ignition switch back on, and I let the water pump and the fan run for a while to get the engine back down below wherever I have the cooling fan set to. I think it's 195 or something like that. Maybe another thing to note is that I have my red idiot light here on the dash, and I have that programmed for two things. One is for shifting. As a shift light, I think it comes on at 6,500 or 6,000, one of those two. I think I have it at 6,500 because I have my line on the tack at 6,000, and so I think the light is supposed to come on as a, hey idiot, you want to shift now. But I also have it set to come on if the coolant temperature gets above a certain temperature. I think that was 205, and that did come on when it was supposed to. So it's nice to see that these functions are doing what they're intended. So I'm really happy with how this went today. I didn't really get a whole lot done per se, in the sense I only ran about 5 wires, but now I can say that wiring that I need to run front to back is complete. I can just go ahead and start looming stuff up and getting everything ready to drive. I know that the heater works. That was something I was kind of wondering about, if there was going to be air bubbles or something like that was going to be a problem. Seems like the answer is no. Seems like that is working just fine. And really the only note is I need to get an overflow tank of some sort, which is really something you should have anyway, and I was planning on anyway, so not a big deal. I'm really happy with how snappy the engine is for having no tuning done to it. I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun once I start driving it. So next video will probably be, next video or two is going to end up being doing the prep work and some of the final items I need to get it ready for first drive. And after that, then we'll be able to put a body on. So coming along really well, very excited. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Have a great day.